Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Parallel League podcast. I am your host, Alliestrasza, and I've got a really exciting episode today because I'm joined by my new co-host, Mookah. How are you feeling?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here, and yeah, today's a really good one.
I'm very, very excited to have Mookah with me for the rest of these episodes. It's going to be really hype. And we've also got a very exciting guest, Veen, TCG lead, senior game designer. Veen, it's amazing to have you on the show. We're excited to grill into you, ask you some questions about design and all the things. How are you feeling this morning?
I'm great. I'm excited. It's a good morning to talk parallel.
Yes, it is. Before we get into the nitty gritty, talking about design and all the things, I think we just want to go over some Parallel League news. Because this past weekend was one of the qualifiers for the YGG Showdown. And we have our first top 8, which is very exciting. There will be 16 players going to Manila in the Philippines in November. And the first top 8 are Jarla, Bullbent, Manos, Gonkra, Nomega, BlizzCon Jan, Tyler, and Zeliaser. So big congrats to them. And Mookah, you are coaching some of these players. So you want to talk a little bit about, what transpired over the weekend?
Yeah, so I was really happy. One of the players that I work with, Manos, got to make it. He's a name that's been known on the ladder forever. You know, repeat rank 1. He beat Lambie in that like race during Koji's what was that? Like the 3K and the PC. If you got first place on ladder, was it last month? And he pushed through and he got it. People have known him for a while. I think he was, when he got in, I messaged him and I was like, finally, like, because he's been so like right there every time, and this time he got it, and it's for qualifier to a major tournament. So I was really happy that he got it. But you just looking at this list, right? It's actually pretty crazy because some of these names are pros in other TCGs. You know, Jarla, BlizzCon Jan, Tyler, like they have come from other TCGs and were already succeeding over there, but decided to compete here, and now we're at the top end over there. Jarla went undefeated this tournament, and Bullbents on the other end is new to this game entirely. Like, just he only came a few months ago. I remember when he was on Tyler's stream asking how to get involved in Parallel, and then within a few months, or within that month, got master rank with Kathy, and now he's just second seed or whatever, second place in this tournament. So really cool to see. Some notable mentions I want to say is Jarla and BlizzCon Jan. They brought a Neve deck with Miasmancer, which was like very interesting. We haven't seen that before. That was like their secret tech. And then Nomega played Asio, and he won every game that he got to play Asio with.
That
So
is incredible.
Yeah, he got the
Awesome.
surprise tech.
Wow, making top 8 with Asio, that's an accomplishment. I love to see that. Wow.
It's so hard. Like, I know we tried to make it work. Because in theory it should work. It does decent into Universal because Universal's kind of slow, so you have time.
Mhm.
And then Shroud, like if you can, as long as you can like get your cards into the waste, it should be fine there too. Because a lot of people are opting for like New Dawn and stuff, so it's a bit of a slower, grindy matchup.
Anyone
So
trying to play attrition, you're set up to really punish them for
exactly, yeah. But we just couldn't get it right. But he did it. But this guy's been playing Asio on ladder for as long as I know. He's arguably also one of the people that discovered drone printer in Universal. Like his name is like one of the first guys that was getting that deck going. So he's always been taking these non-meta decks or decks that were like in theory there but couldn't get to the next level and getting them to that next level. So I'm really happy that he made it in this one.
Yeah, I mean, and if there's anything that we learned from the major with Perp, like Perp brought, stuff that's
Yeah.
not super meta and came runner up, right? So clearly, there's a lot of space to bring things that are unusual and still do incredibly well with it. So
It also helps that you can take advantage of the tournament structure too. Like if you bring
Mhm.
something that's not as obvious, then people's ban decisions are a lot harder. People don't
Yes.
necessarily know the matchups as well. And if you're taking advantage of the fact that like people at the highest level are probably prepared for matches A, B, C, and D of these 4 decks,
Mhm.
and then you're playing matches G, H, and I, like you're really digging deep, and that gives
Yeah.
you a statistical edge.
Absolutely.
Perp has even said it before, like on calls and stuff, that like a lot of the decks that he's ran, if he ran it into a meta that people already knew what deck it was, he would lose. But because he played it and there was like this knowledge gap, he was able to, clinch the wins, and he knew his win condition better than they could figure it out.
Yep. And the thing is, like, that's what's exciting about a multiplayer game in general, right? Like, that's what metagame means. It's the game about the game. And
Mhm.
like when you think about going into a meta, like if there are 3 good decks and they're properly built as paper, rock, scissors, then you have to decide who's going in as, like, if I expect a field of 33% paper, 50% rock, suddenly it's like, okay, well, I know what I'm not playing, right?
And that's why it's a true testament to who's actually an amazing competitive player, because you can grind the ladder, and have a lot of success, but being able to understand that structure and make predictions on what people are going to do really sets you apart. So it's super cool to see these players that are, really proving themselves, and, ultimately the world champion will be that final victor. But it's been very, very cool to see so far. So all of these players, of course, earned league points as well. And then the second qualifier for the other top 8 will be on October 26th and 27th. And I believe that the sign up for that was either the 20th or the 21st. So you definitely need to be like paying attention to the internet on those 2 days, on Twitter, that type of thing, because the exact time is not disclosed. So if you do want to get into that East qualifier, make sure you're paying attention. We've also got the October qualifier for the next major coming up on October 19th. So again, that's the top 64 players from the previous month's ranked ladder will get you into this tournament, and that's obviously a big deal as well. The last major went really, really well. So keep making sure that you're looking out for that. And again, we mentioned this last week, but there's a little bit of an update to the schedule. So, you can always go to parallelleague.game to make sure that you're on top of the dates and everything for all of the future events. All right. Well, if you guys are ready to start moving on into some of these questions about game design,
Let's do it.
Veen, I think before we get started here, can you just tell us a little bit, like, about how long you've been working on Parallel? Give us like a little bit of context about your role and sort of how you are here today.
Sure. So, back in the day, before I was in game design, I came up through IT and uh, web analytics and stuff. So I have a math and computer science background. And then I got into games at Wizards of the Coast, and I worked on Magic for a while. And then I moved to Destiny 2 for a bit, and then I had a kid, took 2 years off, and then now I'm doing this. I've been here since February. I was a contractor for a while where I worked under the current designers on. So the base set came out. I wasn't part of the base set, and then Planetfall was effectively done when I joined. And then I worked on sort of the last half of Aftermath, and then all of set N+1. So I don't think we've released the name of that set publicly yet. But if we have, and I'm
I
being
think Kalos
mysterious,
leaked
then
it. I can't remember.
I can't remember it right
if
now, but I
anyone
think
says the word first, I'll start saying it. But if no one says it, then I'm not going to be the first one to say it.
Deception? Something with a
Deception,
D.
you did it.
yeah,
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm
okay,
like,
okay.
I'm
okay.
too
So,
much of a nerd. It
way
just
to go. No, you did it. So, and so Deception is the first set that I truly took the lead of, and that was the first set that Sam contributed on as well. Um, I've been working on Parallel as a card contributor since February, but as like balance influence and the lead since the rest of the designers left. There was one set of designers after the base set found other opportunities, and then when I joined, the guy that I joined, John Pennick, found something else very quickly afterwards. And it was I worked with him in the past at Wizards, and it was nice working with him. And as soon as I got my feet under me, he was like, "Okay, fine. I found something else. I was getting you situated, but now I have something else to go do." And it felt like I was thrown to the wolves, but it's been super nice. The community's amazing. And the people that I work with are incredible. We have great analytics. We have excellent tools. We have wonderful teams, and it's been like a dream to work at a Web3 company where everything's coming together, which has been super nice. Um, I think that's my story with Parallel. Is there anything else that I missed?
No, I think that was
You
pretty
named all the games
comprehensive.
I grinded. You named all the games that I grinded.
Fantastic. Excellent.
I was
As
a
I
hardcore
mentioned,
Destiny grinder.
awesome. What class were you?
A warlock. Played a lot of warlock.
What's your favorite exotic? One time, maybe I get this one.
Oh man, it's been a while. Okay, there was two of the pistols from Destiny 1. One is the Thorn, I think, that would like do
Yep.
damage over time.
Yep.
And then there was the pistol that you could hip fire. I can't remember the name of that one.
Last word.
Yep, last
Wait,
word. I
do you
used to
remember the
do good.
you remember the gauntlets that worked with Thorn the Necrotic Grips?
Yes. Yeah,
That was
yeah.
my first exotic on Destiny 2. That spread the Thorn
Oh.
damage. I brought combos because I was
Yeah,
like, magic cards combo together, and there weren't exotics that comboed in Destiny, and I was like, let's make combos. We'll do that. That was fun.
that's sick. That's sick.
Very cool. So, working with other people that you've worked with before, like just as this is a little bit of a segue, how has your like personal experience with other card games, how is that affecting your design choices for Parallel?
I think that game design as a career is effectively just a journey of how does your personal experience affect your game design. I think that the more games you play and the more stuff you work on, the more information you have about what your changes are going to do. Because the hardest part is not actually coming up with content. The hardest part is forecasting what the knock on effects of that content are. Like, if you make a
Mhm.
change, what does that change actually do? If you make this card, like, it's easy to come up with individual cards that are exciting, but if you don't know what that does in the greater scheme of the set,
Mhm.
or if you don't understand the concept of net fun or anything like that, then like it can be more difficult. And I would say that my journey, I as a player enjoy more complicated, more wordy, and more complex things than the average player by a lot. Like, I enjoy systems, I enjoy resource manipulation, I enjoy a lot of look ahead, I enjoy a lot of math, and I enjoy more decision points, because the more decision points there are in a game, the more points I have to be um to make the correct decision and have my opponent make a mistake, which gives me the edge. However, that is not how the majority of players play. So part of, and this is, I think, my favorite quote from a fellow game designer. This came from Tom Lapilli at the time. He's now Tom Freed. He's married. Um, he said, the process of becoming an expert in game design, or an expert in anything, is the process of learning the difference between my favorite thing and the best thing. And I
Oof.
think that's actually like very telling. Like, you have to find something that's like, okay, this is the thing that I like the most. This is the thing that I want to do, as opposed to this is what the game actually needs. And I think that my experience on specifically Magic has helped. Like, it's a very similar game. Like, it's the resource system is very different, and the costs of things like mana versus energy is very, very different in terms of a system. But a lot of the lessons learned about what you can do for certain amounts of mana in Magic, and the value of card advantage, the value of tempo, the value of all these things that matter in TCGs. I think if it wasn't for that, it would be a lot harder to manage Parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as it currently stands, I feel like Parallel is a very competitive game. It's hard. I feel like it actually like leans more to your framework right
Oh
now,
yeah,
like
it
on
does.
and how you like to play games. And I've personally thought about that in the past. And like, how is the casual? Like, it's really well suited for the competitive scene right now. How are you, going to not necessarily shift away from it, but just like balance that with like it being exciting for the average person who's not like a super try hard?
Well, this is actually an excellent question, and a lot of people were expecting Catherine's rallying cry nerf in the last
Mhm.
balance patch, and specifically the reason that a bunch of cards got changed and not rallying cry has to do with um the difference in MMR skill level and player base.
Mm.
Uh, if you look at the parallel ladder, right now there is a lot of nagus at the low levels, and a ton of it is bots, and we know that a ton of it is bots, and we're trying to get on top of that. But there's just a ton of nagus, and just a ton of Cathari in general. And in order to get above that, you need to beat their early tempo, and you need to get up a card on them, a card or two. And Rallying Cry is something that both gets you cards and tempo at that crucial early turn in the game. And at low MMRs, Catherine didn't have a high win rate. The card still had a high win rate, but Catherine didn't, which let me know that it was doing its job. The card was actually winning games that it should win, but Catherine itself was still being beaten down by all of the other aggro decks or all the other control decks. And so I didn't want to take away a very important tool that, like, Catherine's Rallying Cry just does what it says on the card. It says, I'm going to get 2 creatures, or I'm going to get 2 units. It's going to put me ahead on board, or tie me on board, and it's going to give me an energy advantage because I'm only spending 3 energy to potentially get up to 6 energy worth of units, right? And being that it is a card that is Paragon specific, it's supposed to have that kind of punch. It's supposed to be, this is, I'm taking a disadvantage by playing this Paragon, and the disadvantage is I'm not playing Lemieux, I'm not playing these other things, I'm locking myself into Cathy and Marcolian. As much of a disadvantage as that is, I understand. But theoretically, what you get for that is you get this strong, you get Cathy's passive, you get Cathy's active, and you get her unique cards. That's the payoff for choosing this Paragon. Um, and I liked the fact that that's where the punch was. I have since softened to the fact that a lot of players really don't like seeing that play pattern, especially at high levels when you start to see a 3 energy card generate a 6 energy play, and at incredibly high levels, it's overwhelming. Like if two players are of completely equal skill and they have very strong decks, and one person just has a 3 energy, 1 card advantage on turn 3 every time, like that's going to cause, especially with Cathy's passive triggering on one of the units as well, that's going to cause a problem. And with enough of negative sentiment, I actually am going to change that card in the next upcoming patch, because I was listening to what the ambassadors and what the players wanted. But my original thesis on why not to change it was, I see where people see the win rate of that card is very high, but the win rate of the Paragon was what was keeping me from changing it at the time. So ideally, what I would have wanted was to find a place to take power away from the Cathy deck at high MMR without taking what the power away from the card that helps novice low MMR players win more often at when they need to get out of the Naeus pit.
That's actually so interesting. So I guess my question off that is like, how do you balance like sentiment versus data? Because this isn't the first time this has happened before, right? Like we saw this with Cathari
No.
when Scipius was like all over the place and stuff. So like at what point do you like, I guess like how do you balance both? Because it seems really difficult.
So you say both, but it's how do you balance X? And there's a ton of things that need to be balanced. Like you need to balance sentiment, you need to balance sales, you need to balance new
Yep.
players, you need to balance the format. Um, it's difficult, and a lot of it is a judgment call, and a lot of it is just also trial and error. It turns out that if you turn the wrong knob, you get to see what happens, and it goes wrong. I
Yeah.
don't think that we're taking experimental shots here. I think we're taking pretty calculated shots. But in the last patch specifically, we also did have a new team that was spun up of people on board called the Meta and Balance team. And what I did was, because it was a bunch of players that were super invested, like these were players that they work at Parallel now, so they're employees, but they started and they didn't work at Parallel. They just loved the game. They all got jobs. The three guys that are the core of the team, Beal, Babbitt, and Bounty, we call them the 3 Bs, and they're fantastic at this. And they had a huge swath of ideas, and I went through, and a lot of the ideas we could do, some of the ideas we couldn't do, and some of them we could do at a different time. But I figured, why not do them all right now, in addition to trying to balance sentiment. So when the most recent, I think, curious calls that people are going to be interested in hearing about are Steward of the I call it Steward of the Grove.
Of the
Garden.
garden.
Yeah.
Steward of the Garden. I always want to call it Grove. So Steward of the Garden change, and how Ingrid and Freitas were not immediately mega nerfed. They were just like semi nerfed, and then there was a note that was saying mega nerf these soon. But that did not hit the way that we expected with the community. Like we expected that to be. So sentiment balancing was the core of the question. We have one pile of sentiment here, which is a bunch of new players that just got these new legendaries as part of
Yeah.
the wonderful pro decks that Parallel put out. Where there were these creator decks. One of them was all universal, and it had 3 legendaries in it, which was the most legendaries of any deck, and it was 3 strong legendaries. It was Wong, Ingrid, and Freitas. And the win rates of those cards and the play rates of those cards went through the roof. A bunch of people had them, a bunch of people were playing them, and you were doing what the cards were telling you to do, and you were doing what a creator deck told you to do. So it felt unfair of me to immediately just kneecap those decks and take the legs right out from under them, because people made this choice, they calculated it. If you're a free-to-play player, that's some of the only action that you get in terms of acquiring cards and expanding your collection. And I didn't want to say, well, because you made the smart choice, I'm going to punish you for that. That just felt a little bit arbitrary and heavy-handed. But I also didn't want to do nothing because the numbers were too harsh. So I dinged them, and a lot of times, and Riot does this all the time, where if you ding something and you change a number down and you nerf something, even if it's not impactful, the psychological change of it being nerfed actually causes the play rate to go down.
Hmm.
Even if it's not a substantial nerf, and buffs cause play rates to go up, even if it doesn't actually matter. So you can change a meaningless number, like if you change an attack speed number without hitting another specific gap, like if you change it so uh, it's hard for me to come up with an exact example, but there are numbers that you can change that have a 1 to 2% change in overall power or less than that, and those still cause huge swings. So I was hoping that by nerfing this, a bunch of new players would say, okay, I don't want to play this. That did not happen. We're going to have to heavy nerf them. But we also had the ambassador call after that, where
Mm.
we talked about, um, like, I wanted to hear the players say, we want these nerfed more than we want to own them. And that was something that I wanted to balance because I didn't know that for sure. Like, that was something where if I knew that the player base was angry enough at what was going on, rather than wanting to own these cards at a certain strength, I would have nerfed them harder in the first place. But it was early on, and I didn't want to do that. And then with Steward of the Garden, that was one of the slew of changes. Like, there were a bunch of changes that were of cards that got buffed or got nerfed that weren't in competitive decks at the time. And that was me giving faith to the new team and saying, I believe in your testing, I believe in your theories, I believe in what you want to do for the game. And I even pushed back against Steward of the Garden and I said, Earthen's win rate is actually less than where I want it to be right now. What do we do? Like, why are we nerfing this? And the argument, and I believed it, was that Steward of the Garden's win rate was actually out of band, even for a faction that was too weak. And what that means is, and you can think back to games that you've had on the ladder, like there are games where they'll play Steward of the Garden and they just run away with the game. Like, you're not even really
Yeah.
playing a game where, unless you have the ability to remove it on the turn that they play it or the turn after, they're getting such an energy advantage that they run away, that it just becomes a non-game. Not a non-game, but it was not as close as most parallel games should be. And something that is that early of a drop shouldn't be that consistent of a card. It should provide a lot of power, but because it's a ramp card, I don't want to move it up the curve. I could have made it cost 2, or I could have made it cost 3 or 4 or 5, but that's less fun. Like, what you want the card to do is generate extra energy and stay low to the ground. So making it easier to remove and easier to get off the board was the way to handle that. So it looks like I took a weak faction and weakened one of their strongest cards, which I did. But what we were actually doing was taking some of the games that Earthen was clawing away from parallels where they shouldn't have clawed it away and made them a little bit closer. But the card's core fun and core issue just doesn't uh, have the same punch. Now, you were mentioning back in the day with Scipius, that sentiment balance was harder to it was harder to manage because I don't know how specific I want to get with the data here, but I think I'm just going to release actual round numbers. So the issue with Scipius was um, Scipius and Naeus, when we nerf Cathari cards, the play rate doesn't move down commensurately. Like, because bots are playing them, it is occasionally true that we will make a nerf and that the play rate will stay the same or go up. And so what I don't want to do is keep nerfing those cards for the legitimate players that are playing those decks and harm the people and catch them in the splash damage. Like, I want to make sure that we're toning down automation. We're making it so players are winning instead of bots,
Mhm.
and that games get to go to natural conclusions and that they're fun. And but sometimes you have to nerf. I'm still sad about where the win rates landed on that. Like, it is
Yeah.
sad to see that, like, at low MMRs there are still Paragons that have deeply under 50% win rates, and that's something that I'm trying to work on. At the mid to high MMRs, I'm actually pretty happy with where everything is, but I overbalanced on sentiment at the low MMR, and I think I need to balance it back up. But my concern is always toward the newer player versus the older player. And even though the older player and the more experienced player and the high MMR is more important to the structure of the esports scene and more important to the life of the game for the enfranchised player, the more important player for the overall life of the game is actually the new player. Like, if you aren't getting new players, then your game isn't growing and you won't continue to have experienced players 2 years from now.
That makes a
So
lot of
super
sense.
long-winded answer
Yeah.
about a
No,
whole
I
bunch
I
of stuff.
I think that gives
But
a lot of insight. So, like, when you do get to those points, like, let's use Scipius as an example, right? I don't think we've seen in parallel too often yet the concept of, like, retconning isn't the right word, but, like, bringing back stuff that may have been tuned too far or something like that. So, like, you mentioned Scipius an example.
yeah,
I know that
we
the
gave
community is gonna ask
the
me.
one. Like Gafar got nerfed and then got
Yes.
unnerfed.
Oh, it did. Yes, it
Yeah,
did get the
we
+1,
wait,
+1 nerf.
I actually so when I was making that change, people were saying, "Oh, we made that change back in the day. Do we wanna just undo and say we were wrong?" I was like, "Mm, sure, things change."
Yeah.
Like, I'm not
Mhm.
afraid to say that, like, a change wasn't exactly perfect. I'll also say that, like, situations change. Like, if we look today at the card sets that's out, like, Gafar is a different card now because Planetfall's out.
Yeah.
And next set when Aftermath drops, then, like, what is true for today's balance and today's cards might not be true for those cards, right? And so it doesn't mean that we've made a mistake necessarily. We could have made a mistake. It's possible to make mistakes with big complicated game. But it also might just mean that, like, the world is different now and what was okay is no longer okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Someone's gonna ask me in like in some sort of comment to ask this, but do you think we'll ever see a world where Scipius gets its token attack back?
Oh, yes.
Probably not. I mean,
Uh,
maybe, but, like, that's so, uh, I want it to be there, but when you look at what the core fun of Scipius actually is, like, what's the core fun of Catherine playing another unit, playing
Yep.
burn? What's the core fun of Scipius? The core fun of Scipius is you get additional units. Like, that's you're banking units and they're turning into units, like, that's exciting, right? And I think that as long as like when it had the power, we all remember how snowbally that was.
Yeah.
And the issue is, like, you can't make it cost one. You can't make it cost anything because it's not worth that much energy, right? It's worth less than one energy, but it's worth more than zero energy, right? And so
Yeah.
the value that you're getting for effectively, it's not even zero that you're paying, it's kind of -1 because you're getting it for banking, right? So, like, the amount of energy that you're paying for this effect is over the course of the game snowbally, and part of what makes Cathari defeatable is the fact that if you just get through their swarm and get through what they're deploying, you get to control the board and take control of the game. And Scipius sort of undermined that because absolutely everything that they were doing, including building their economy, trying to stabilize the board, all of that generated material for them on the board, and they just kept getting these free pawns to lose. And we found that that was just something that decks had a really hard time overcoming. I respect the design a lot. I understand where they were coming from, and I think it's exciting and fun. But, like, it turns out that in a game that is as well balanced and as differentiated as the game that they created in the base set, that just was too much.
for
Gotcha.
me,
Um,
it was less about the adjutant clone, change, but also the chamber change too, because
Yeah, Hydraless Chamber was
yeah.
just
I
yeah.
feel like that card just enabled so many interesting lines of play, and just for me personally, like, I think you could still have the O1 and, you know,
Yeah.
it
My
just it
hot
makes
take
for
is
very
Chamber's
interesting
still good.
decisions. Yeah.
I still think Chamber's good.
I don't
Like,
Okay.
think that's a hot take. I think the Chamber's fine. I
yeah.
think it's just not
Stabilized
where it
Shard
was.
is, like, almost auto include in every deck that includes some
Sure.
sort of, like, ramp mechanic to hit their higher power cards, and, like, as Cathari has access to 3 of those, and obviously it's, like, best played in Sippy. Uh, I think as we get more cards and stuff like that, and Veen, obviously knows more of the behind what's behind the curtain and stuff, but as we get more cards that are a bit better, towards the late game for Cathari, Chamber's stocks go up, right? So then Sippius will
It
see probably some
only
more
ever
planes
gets
up.
better. Correct, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
makes sense.
That actually makes a lot of sense, and while I am sad about the Scipius thing, I understand where you're coming from. And circling back to Earthen a little bit, I just feel like from a competitive play angle, Earthen is in such a tough spot. Even if you make it
It
good, I think the new Battle Pass card is really good. By the way, I like that card a lot. But it's in this tough spot where let's use this meta as an example, right? You have two, like, let's call them S tier decks with Catherine and Universal, and then you can bring in the Earthen, which is most popularly the Nehemiah. Let's use Nehemiah as an example here. And then if you bring Nehemiah into, like, your lineup with those two, you're more often than not going to have to ban Shroud because it is inherently a very, very tough matchup. Like, you cannot, it's not, it's more, you're more often going to lose that matchup than win it. So you have to ban, like, let's call an A tier deck. and then leave them with 2 S tier decks. And if you're the opponent, you're kind of like, okay, well, their Earthen, let's say their Earthen Rock, Paper, Scissors has a good matchup against my unit Catherine. I ban their Earthen, and then I'm like, both players are kind of like in the kind of like 50-50, like 2 S tier decks against each other at equal level of play. It's kind of just like who has the cards versus who doesn't have the cards. Yes, there's skill involved, but let's assume like equal skill level.
Yep.
So then, as the Earthen player coming into that tournament, you're kind of like, well, I didn't gain any edge in this matchup for bringing my Earthen deck. You almost need a second deck that is kind of breaking the meta to eat the ban, or the Earthen eats the ban and that second deck gets to work before the Earthen kind of shines in your comp. So like, it's just really, really hard right now. And I wonder, like, do you have any thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, for sure. So there's 2 ways that Parallel is played. You're
Mhm.
playing the Parallel version that you play in tournaments, and you play the version that you
Yep.
play in the ladder. And the
Yeah.
version that you play in tournaments, Earthen has to overcome the deck problem that you're talking about.
Yep.
And the problem on the ladder is that it has to overcome the fact that it has to be shaped in a way to battle any deck, right?
Yeah.
So the decks that you're playing, the Earthen deck that you're playing on the ladder versus the Earthen deck that you're playing in the tournament probably look different. And that's different. That most other parallels aren't doing that. Most other parallels get to
For
have
sure.
their most efficient version on the ladder also be their most efficient
Mhm.
version as a tournament deck. And that Earthen mystery hasn't been cracked yet. Does that mean that deck exists and we just haven't found it? I don't know. It could exist. There could be the perfect Earthen deck there. One of the issues I think Earthen has, and this is something where I don't want to throw anyone under the bus or anything like that, but I will say that like Earthen in the base set, I think got the short end of the stick, because if you look at what every faction gets in terms of like their keywords and their mechanics,
Mhm.
Earthen's keywords are actually, and if this is unfortunate, they're just downsides. Like
Yep.
Yeah.
Decay is a downside and Pacifist is a downside, right? So it's really hard to want to find something competitive about such downside mechanics unless the upside is commensurately high. And I don't think that there was any. I think that the shots that were taken with Decay and with Pacifist were taken conservatively. And I think that those conservative shots, on top of them being downside mechanics, just mean that Earthen has a little ways to come to hit the same maturity as the rest of the decks that are out there, and the other parallels have kind of an edge on that. However, as we've seen, like when Earthen's powerful, Earthen's powerful. Like
Mhm.
when Gafar is strong, Gafar is strong. Defender as a concept, like Defender as a mechanic, is strong, and I think that that's why the other mechanics were downside mechanics, because during the initial, like if you're looking at what mechanics in the game matter, Defender is one of the most important ones. And if you make Defender central to a parallel, and I would say that Defender belongs to Earthen more than it belongs to any other parallel, I think that that is what they expected to be super strong. And I think that because people just figured out how to play the tempo game very quickly, I think Earthen never caught up to that. So I think what Earthen needs is either earlier tempo plays, uh, or a way, like a mechanic that is theirs that lets them play with the other parallels in a proactive way instead of a defensive reactive way.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna ask if you envision like a rework more so to Earthen, or do you think that you will print maybe like a stronger, like a card that is strong enough that it can actually like push decay, you know?
both.
Both.
So like
Okay.
I'm not gonna, like, as far as Decay and Pacifist are concerned, those are not getting reworked.
Okay.
Reworking what Earthen is about, that's happening. Like as we release more sets, we're gonna sort of shift what Earthen's about, because as it has been demonstrated, Earthen being about the things it's about, not good enough.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
not getting there. Even if it turns out that we're mathematically correct, like let's say that if everything was known and everyone had infinite time to playtest, the best deck is Earthen. We haven't discovered it. People don't like it, and the win rates don't show us that. So we're going to change tune on that and start going in a couple different directions. That doesn't mean we're not going to support Decay, and it doesn't mean we're not going to support Pacifist. In fact, my favorite card in Aftermath is a card that combos with a super strong Earthen card and has. I'll just tell you about the card actually.
Let's
Oh,
Um,
do it.
let's
so
go. Yeah.
who can tell me no? Uh, so um, there is a 3 energy 6/6 pacifist.
Okay.
Uh, and it has the ability, through a mechanic that you don't understand yet, to lose pacifist. But there is another card that has you select one of your units to deal damage equal to its attack to a bunch of things. And
Ooh.
having early large pacifists, like that's something that you can't do without pacifist,
Yeah.
right? Like you couldn't
Right.
make a 3 energy 6 power unit unless it was a 6-1 and had some other downside, right? Like
Mm.
that just changes what the game is about. But that also feels very earthen to me. It feels like what you're doing is putting a huge body on the board, and if you can somehow give it defender, you have a 6/6 very early. If you can somehow use its attack, you have a 6/6 very early. If you bring out an event or an effect that uses the attack, then fantastic. So I think that there are places to go, and what I'm going to try to do going forward is play with the old but bring in the new, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So
Yeah.
not a rework per se, but sort of a glow up and then new space.
I
Gotcha.
like that
That
terminology.
makes a lot of
A glow
sense.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
That seems so hard to do from the outside because you guys have a limited amount of cards, right? That you work with in each set, right? So how do you do like, how do you allocate like, okay, this goes to these mechanics that maybe need more love, and then this goes to all new. So
That's
that's
literally the job. That is the hard
yep,
part.
that
You
is
are right. You
yeah.
are right that it is difficult. And the hardest part is to figure out like so it parallel is fortunate and lucky in the fact that, and I say this right now in quotes because this might change. Who actually knows? We currently don't have a draft format, which means that we don't
Mm,
have to worry about commonality. We don't have to worry about limited. We don't have to worry about a lot of the things where that was most of the load bearing in card games like Magic. Like you have to look at when you draft like when you're opening packs, every common matters in a way where you can have more than one of them in a draft, and you have to create a set where if all you're doing is playing with just those cards, the game is fun. And Parallel doesn't have to do that. Like you're never going to play just aftermath cards and see if you can make a game happen. So we have more space there, which is nice. Like we have a lot of stuff where we don't have to have low energy defender. We don't have to have the
mm,
replacement for PSA. We don't have to have
Mhm.
all these things that make the game work in every set. You get to have those be in the base set, and then you have a lot more slots to work with because they already exist. Now, if we ever have rotation or if we ever have draft or we ever have limited, that introduces those restrictions back again. But basically, what you want to do is make sure that if you're coming up with a new mechanic and it goes to all of the parallels, you want to make sure that it shows up on the commons so people can tell that this is a mechanic that every parallel has. If it's a mechanic that only one parallel has, you want to make sure that it's something where it shows up in more than one rarity so people can see the evolution of the mechanic. And if it's a mechanic that is in only one parallel, then maybe it shouldn't be a mechanic. Maybe this is something where you want to wait for it to uh, be on more than one card, move it to another set, something like that. Or maybe it doesn't need to be a new mechanic; it's just one card by itself. But when you're asking like, how do you make sure that you get to change the format, have exciting cards, have marketable stuff, and also have like cool art and cool themes all in one set? Like, yeah, every card does have a lot of jobs and a lot of masters, and that's kind of the hard part of the job. But if you just keep them in mind, and when you take a look at it, like there's a really good book on game design. If anyone's interested in becoming a game designer, I can't recommend this enough by Jesse Shell. It's called Game Design Through Lenses, and it comes with this deck of cards that's a bunch of lenses, and you can pull them and say like, as far as new players are concerned, how does this set look? Or pull another one and it says, as far as players who like sci-fi are concerned, or as far as players who are colorblind are concerned, or as far as players who like action are concerned, or as far as players who like role playing are concerned. And if you just keep that in mind, like you don't have to use the deck every time, but just keep changing your lens. Like remember that your lens, like you as a player, you as a designer, you as one person, you have this very myopic view, this very microcosmic view of what the game is about, but the game is about so much more to so many more people. So just
yeah.
change what you're thinking about. Look at, do you have anything that's exciting? Like some people like and this is something that came from working on Magic 2. Mark Rosewater came up with the idea of player psychographics, and this is very valuable, where people play to experience different things. Like people play for
Mm,
different joy reasons. And there are people, there's Timmy Tammy, Jenny, Johnny, and Spike. And so Tammy likes to play to experience something. They like rolling dice. They like big creatures. They like attacking. They like things that feel dramatic. Jenny Johnny wants to express something. They want to show how good their deck is. They want to show how they came up with a theme. They made a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs commander deck, that sort of thing. And Spike wants to prove something. Spike wants to win. And so if you're thinking about how if there are cards for Timmy, Johnny, and Spike in there, you're doing good. If there are cards for all your mechanics in there, you're doing good. If there are cards that you can put on a preview site on Twitter and say this is very exciting, or x.com now. If you put it on the site and say like this will sell the set, that's doing a good job. If you've got your mechanics covered, that's doing a good job. And then as soon as you release the set, you realize there's four
mm.
more things you wanted to put in it and you made a mistake. But other than that, you just try to jam in as much as you can.
Do you feel like the current design team has good representation, like, amongst the different characters? Because I feel like that would probably really help, to, have different mindsets, everyone,
That's a
contributing.
that's a really good question, and I think so. I think we're small right now, but I think that we come from such a varied background, and we all like different enough games that when one person comes up with an idea that's cool for them, we get to give it like a plus up and say like, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea. What if it also did this?"
Cool.
And so there's a lot of ideas coming from a lot of different places. I think if I had to say that we had a weakness, I think our current weakness, and I think a weakness of the game in general, is for the Johnny Jenny player. I think it's very hard to find a way to like creatively deck build and express yourself in this
Mhm.
game because I think it's very tempo based, and I think
Yeah.
that there are
Sure.
there's also not a ton of cards out right now. Like right, we're
Yeah.
only 2 sets in. It's a brand new game, and I think like as you start growing and there's more stuff to do. But I also think that like I think Ingrid and Freitas were supposed to be Johnny cards, and they just turned out to be a little bit
Yeah.
too strong. I think they were
Yeah.
supposed to be like, "Oh, I'm gonna play all universal, and I'm gonna play this crazy thing, and it's gonna
Yeah.
be out there." Um,
It
one
did
of
feel
my
like that for a while.
It
It
felt
did
like a
feel
and
like
meme, like, I was like,
it
"Oh, I'm
did.
making a
yeah.
universal deck, and this is weird," and then it's like, "Oh, no."
Yeah. And the thing is, I think that if you look at base set specifically, there were a lot of parts that were missing for that deck to be good, and I think that
Mm,
Planetfall. So I when I was talking to Pennick about it, Pennick was the one of the main designers behind Planetfall. He was trying to figure out what Universal was doing in the set, and he thought, well, in the base set, there's this all Universal deck, but it's impossible. Let's add some support for it and make it possible, but not too strong. And I think he just added a little bit too much power. I think that the consistency of Drone Printer, which was supposed to be for grindy decks, right? It was supposed to be for slow decks. I think that that is a little bit more than we expected in terms of allowing consistency. And the number, I mean, when you look at an 8 energy card in the base set meta, like it was a meme. It was nonsense. Like there was no way to make this happen, and I think that it just got too much gas in Planetfall.
there was a period of time in Hearthstone history where the design team kinda took a step back and was like, "Wait a minute, the class identity amongst them is getting a little bit muddled," and they had to take a step back and, like, really lean back into it, and so I'm kind of curious if you're thinking about that, and this also kinda leads into the question of, like, in the lore, thematically, are you trying to stick to the Earthens being maybe strong against the Markolians or vice versa or whatever it may be? In the case of Earthen with Shroud, like, do you want there to sort of be natural counters, or does that lean
So
to like
in
rock, paper,
terms of like
scissors? Yeah.
enemy colors, ally colors, I don't think that I'm gonna do too much of that, because
Mhm.
you can't play like if this was a game where you could combine parallels and decks, and you
Right.
could play
Yeah.
different energy sources, I feel like that'd be interesting because dipping into a color hurts your consistency and hurts your energy income, but gives you access to this part of the color pie. I think that that's important to have in a game where that's the deck building rule. But the deck building rule in this game is actually just you pick a parallel; those are the cards that you get, right? So
Yeah.
putting answer cards in the parallel kind of just means that, like, if I put like Earthen, like a 1 cost Destroy Any Shroud card, right? Like that's the kind of hate card that would exist in Magic or something like that.
Mhm.
That's actually kind of unfun because it's really hard to decide to want to play them because in 80% of your games, literally 4 out of 5, you shouldn't be playing Shroud. So that card doesn't do anything. And in the fifth game, it just feels unfair and unfun, right? So like if this was a multi-game format where like you could change your deck between games and there was sideboarding, or if you could build your deck differently, I would do answers like that. But in terms of like taking a step back and saying like what is each parallel doing? What is the thing that Earthen's about? What is the thing that Shroud's about? Um I It's hard because I wasn't part of those original conversations. Like I wasn't here during base set when they came up with what those lines were going to be, and a lot of them feel kind of blurry. But wherever it's blurry, the thing that I like about working on this game is it's answered by the lore. Like it's if you look at like why is Markolian aggro, you get it. You get Lemieux, you get Catherine, you get
Sure.
what their cards are doing. You get Trigger Happy Trooper explains to you what Markolian's about. It tells you the whole thing right on the card. And Valerusi Striker does a pretty good job of telling you what early Cathari is about, that sort of thing. So even though there's a lot of similarity. I do want to start pulling mechanics out. Like, instead of adding mechanics in, I think what I want to do is start removing access that some parallels have to certain things, and have that be more of, well, if you want to have additional cards, play this parallel. If you want to have stronger units, play this parallel. If you want to have stronger non-unit cards, play this. If you want to play relics, if you want to play upgrades, like, everyone knows where, if you want to play upgrades, you play Augencore. Well, if you want to play banish, you play shroud. If you want to play damage events and effects, you play Markolian. But like, there aren't reasons to play there. Like, there isn't a reason. If I want to play X, I play Earthen other than Defender, but every parallel has access to Defender, and that's something that I can't remove from everything else. So I think for example, I would like to remove uh, getting additional cards in an easy way from Markolian. I feel like the way that Markolian should get additional cards is by having, like, fleet support is a way they get additional cards. Catherine's Rallying Cry is a way they get additional cards. I don't think that they should have cards that just draw them additional cards.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like,
Yeah.
they're the
They got
faction
it
that
all.
they're the faction that should run out of cards.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you should
Triumph
beat
of
them when
Mars
they run out of cards.
is everyone's on everyone's hate list, I think, for sure, if
Yeah,
you're playing against Marco.
the Triumphs were an interesting call. It's really hard to balance them because the what they're trying to do is shore up the weakness of the
Yeah.
parallel, and so it's hard because you want them to be impactful, but if they're impactful and they remove the weakness of the parallel, then that's really hard to overcome. So finding a place where they're impactful but not broken is very difficult. Like,
I feel like they're either broken or they're bad. Like, right now, at least.
you really summed it up.
Yeah, they're either broken or they're bad.
So it's hard to find that real that balance, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
hard to say whether or not you're on either side of the line with those cards.
Yeah.
Those are cards that probably should have waited a couple more sets to get released, but I understand releasing them in set 2 because, I mean, they all read exciting, right? And
Yeah.
like, and the flagships, like, I get why you're doing this, right? And especially because I think one of the whiffs of the base set that I think is the most lamentable is that all of the legendaries weren't good. I think that
Mm.
I think that every legendary in the base set should have been strong, um, or give you a reason to want to build a deck, as opposed to some of them are pretty niche and pretty Johnny-ish, and I think that that's what they were going for. But I think without having the deck be successful, that there isn't a draw to actually go out and build it. So what I want to do is start to breathe life into those cards over time as well.
Yeah. It sounds like, and this is gonna lead to the one of the point that I feel like about the game right now, but it does sound like, there's gonna be almost this like reinvestment back into the parallels rather than maybe like the universal side. Like, you touched on drone printer. I've never seen a card, by the way, like perfect the deck so well as I saw when drone printer was discovered for universal. It like shored up like the only weakness that it had and just made the deck like amazing. But I just feel like universals in general in parallel they're definitely on the stronger side, right? Compared to other TCGs, I guess, that I've seen, where like the card that can fit into anything is good, but like maybe needs like a counterpart that fits with the rest of the parallel that or the color that it's in, and to like really synergize with it and become strong. In parallel, it feels like a lot of the universals are very, very like high up there. Like, obviously the legendaries are a lot of them are almost must adds, uh, more so than not. And then for the ones that are good, that are three ofs, like drone printer, miasmancer probably being the biggest one. Like we talked about Earthen a lot. I think miasmancer is probably like the kryptonite that made Earthen like fall over, because like if you're making the crux of the deck across defenders, and then I can slap a 3 cost
Mm.
that suddenly, oh, there's no keywords anymore, I can tack whatever I want. Then that whole strategy kind of falls over. Like, how, when these cards, I guess, I mean, you can only talk to the I guess like the cards that you were more involved in, but like with
Well,
universals, I
and the
guess.
concepts overall. Like,
Yeah.
I understand your question. Um, so whether or not our universal cards are more powerful in general than other universal cards, I don't think is necessarily true. I think that if you had to decide in this game to err on the side of powerful versus like strong versus weak for universal, I think erring strong is correct, because you don't get to put, like, they're the only cards other than the cards in your parallel that you get to put in
Mhm.
your decks, and they're the cards so this is going to sound a little bit strange, but if you want to really impact the meta, you impact it with universal cards, not with parallel cards. Like, if I
Yeah.
want the meta to change, I
Mhm.
can't change it with one earthen card. I have to change it with universal cards most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so the difficulty is then if you're putting in a bunch of cards that are supposed to impact the meta and there's a strong mono universal deck, that deck is going to get those cards first. So once there's not a super strong S tier all universal deck, then those cards just start disseminating out into the other decks that need to play them. Like
Mhm.
Miasmancer is not an auto 3 of in every deck, right? And like
Right.
because of that, like, but it is an auto 3 of in mono universal. Like that is
Yeah.
the difference, right? So like I will say specifically in the case of Miasmancer is also like a very unique answer in a very young game, so it's seeing a bunch of play. But once there are a bunch of different kinds of answers that show up, you'll see a varied suite of what people are playing, as opposed to right now where it's like, well, Miasmancer is kind of the only thing that does this, so everyone's playing it.
Yeah.
And I think
Is
that'll shift.
is Miasmancer kind of like the Parallels concept of maybe like what do they call it? Instant speed interactions in other
Instants or
TCGs?
traps or things like
Yeah.
kind of,
Is
yeah. So
okay.
because Parallel is fully asynchronous, um, we don't want to create uh, a turn stop when it's not your turn. We don't want to create things where there are response windows. Like we don't want to have a major UI overhaul and a major game engine overhaul to allow you to take game actions when it's not when you shouldn't be able to take game actions, which is what's required for a game with a stack like Magic. Like Magic was not supposed to be a digital game. The fact that Arena is good is a testament to that team, but like it was built to be a very very paper game, and the
Mhm.
rules do not allow it to be a very good digital game, and they've done a wonderful job making a digital game. But Parallel is very much ground up a digital game, and so we don't want to have those windows that make the digital experience less good. Um, so we will have more proactive answers, like maybe we do face down cards, but almost all of them are going to be played in advance. Like Miasmancer is a proactive answer, so like you will
Mhm.
have a lot more proactive stuff than reactive stuff, and the reactive stuff will still take place on your turn. Like I feel confident saying that we will not have off turn
Yeah.
interaction anytime soon.
Does when you say like off turn interactions, does that also include stuff like paradox and like rug pull and stuff that exists now, like more on the relic side, where you do have these interactions that you could technically play on your opponent's side?
So no, I dig those.
Okay,
And
'cause I like those a
that's
lot.
Oh, yeah.
those are also like finding ways to make relics and activate and other timing windows where like finding ways that the engine can handle it without playing cards from hand. Yeah, we'll be exploring more of that too. Like
Okay.
the interactivity is the lifeblood of a good TCG. And
Yeah.
finding ways to have art like in a direct attack game like Hearthstone, like Parallel, there's just a ton of interaction that happens naturally. Like we don't really have to buff interaction. But when it comes to like I want more choice, I want more power, I want more synergy in my interaction, like that stuff will come. But it won't come in the form of like instance from hand. It'll come in the form of like Miasmancer as like slow on my turn proactive answer, or rug pull, or is Cyberdeck console out yet? I don't think it's out yet.
No.
Uh, well, then there's another card coming out that
Write
has
it down, guys. Write it down.
Chris.
maybe we'll make more relics that have interrupts on them. Who knows?
Okay.
I think
I always
relics
thought
would
that
be
was
a
like yeah.
Oh, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
No, I was gonna say I feel like relics were kind of like when I saw them, I thought like, okay, this is like their because I came from a Yu-Gi-Oh perspective, so like I always like, oh, these are like the trap cards, or like in Hearthstone, these are like the I forget what you call them, the counters, like when Mage had the
Secrets?
question mark, yeah,
Secrets.
the secrets.
Yeah.
It's like their form of that, and I kind of like that it's like up front in your face, so that there's kind of like from like a competitive angle, there are cards that already destroy relics, right? So if you have a relic that says, like, hey, I can counter this interaction, you either have option A, whereas like you try to bait out that cancel so that you can do whatever your real plan is, or B, you just have like the answer and you just remove it, which means you have to play those cards in your deck to remove the relic. So all in all, I always thought it kind of fit hand in hand.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that relics are going to become more important to the meta, and relic removal will become more important as the game ages. Like right now, it's a very unit centric game, and it will always be unit centric as a direct attack game. But I will say that the relative importance of relics will grow as the game matures and as we print more and more exciting relics.
Yeah, they seem
But
like
like
a good avenue for instant speed stuff for sure.
Mhm.
Like even defending. I mean, defending is one of my favorite things about Parallel. And I don't know, I feel like the take your turn and then you can just like run to the bathroom. And then I personally love the interactivity. And I feel like leaning more into that is
Yeah.
um is fun, but I can understand the not wanting to necessarily like recreate the whole, instant counter spells like with magic and stuff like that. So it seems
Mhm.
like Parallel could go about it in a very unique way that gives you that interactivity without it being exactly like magic.
Yep, we have unique technology that lets us do some cool stuff without having to create a game engine that is substantially more involved and laggy than what we currently have. Like what we
Yeah,
have is good and getting better, and I think that we can do a lot with the space that we have to create competitive, engaging, interactive games.
for sure.
Are there any personal for you like mechanics that you'd like to see in parallel more? Like some people have talked about like more interaction with like banking and stuff like that, but is there any to you that you can't wait to like ship out and have us mess around with?
I'm so excited. So I know that Aftermath is the set that's coming out, and it's the set I should be hyping, and I am hyping it. I was part of the second half of it, but Deception's my baby. I'm very excited about it. I've got I've so like yes, is there stuff I want in parallel? Absolutely, and luckily I get to put it there.
Right.
I wish I could say exactly more about what's happening, but I will say that like one of the most unique things about Parallel is the bank zone.
Mhm.
I feel like there are mechanics that are coming out in Aftermath and Deception that play with that. Um, if I had my way, I would flip them. I think the one in Deception should happen first and the one in Aftermath should happen second. But alas, that is not happening. So the one in Aftermath will happen first. And it's very exciting. It's a good one. It's informational, which is interesting. How much do you guys know about that mechanic? Has anything been revealed?
No, we don't know much at all.
Mm,
We
Mm.
know one
Maybe you can
aftermath
tell us
mechanic,
and
I
give us
think.
the
But yeah,
inside scoop.
I could. Let me
Exclusive for
see.
the podcast.
he's like DMing, like he's DMing to figure out like, all right, am I allowed to talk about this?
We're
I think
trying,
the
chat,
only
we're trying.
yeah, I think the only new mechanic we know about is an aftermath mechanic for Marco. What is it? Effect charge. That was like one of
Okay,
the
so you know
leaked
about
mechanics.
charge. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Okay.
know affect charge, and we weren't told what it does, but my guess is to activate the effect. Look for an effect charge, you have to reveal an effect in your bank to get the effect
You
of
are
that
right.
unit or card.
Ooh, love that. Love that.
You have guessed it. So charge says as an additional cost to do whatever. So when you play the card, when you attack, whatever, it'll tell you when to charge. And to charge is to take unrevealed bank cards and reveal them.
Okay.
And then so to effect charge, you do that with effects. To
Okay.
upgrade charge, you do that with upgrades. To clone charge,
So
you do that with
charge is the
clones.
mechanic, but there's
Charge
like
is the
I
different.
mechanic, and
see.
there's like
Okay.
sub kinds of charge on different cards. Yes. Um, and I feel like charge is a good mechanic. It's interesting. There's a bunch of fun cards with charge on it. But I think it's the one that like is less obvious than the mechanic that's coming out in Deception for what the bank cards do. But in this one, I will keep secret because it's long enough in the future and it's very exciting, and I don't want to take the hype away from Aftermath.
Okay.
Well,
Um,
yeah, charge should theoretically make some other cards that are about revealing cards. Like a lot of the time it's like kind of pointless, there's not that much of an effect, but it
It could
should
make
make
smuggled
sense.
supplies good, finally. The card that lets you play stuff from your bank as a
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. For that.
well, all of the things that you're thinking of are probably in the set. So you
Okay.
have thought about
yeah,
things
yeah.
that care about having revealed information, care about turning cards back face down. Like once you have the ability to turn these cards face up, that's something else you can care about in the game.
Yeah.
And so we didn't leave that unplumbed. There's a bunch of stuff that cares about things that get revealed when it becomes revealed when you turn them back face down. Actually, there's a
Okay.
bunch of cards that turn them face down as cost, so you'll have to charge in order to get them turned
Ooh,
on.
maybe John will see play. Are you guys trying to save John in
I
this
am
in this
always trying to save John.
set?
That actually was like I kind of wanted to segue a little bit because we haven't really talked about paragons, specifically at all. So I'm just kind of curious how you're thinking about the, identity dispersed, within the parallel itself from the paragons. And would you ever, think it would be a good idea for competitive players to actually bring more than one Augencore deck and it's, John and Workshop? Or do you think that would be kind of toxic for the competitive scene? Like, I'm just sort of curious about general thoughts on that type of stuff.
So, right now, I would say that the fact that Unishop even exists is an artifact of the tournament format. I think that if it wasn't for the fact that people would have to find a fourth deck to play, people would have been fine bringing the top 3, because I think that Unishop is like maybe 3rd, maybe 4th in terms of overall best. And I think that like bringing two of the same parallel but different paragons, um, I don't know if that's toxic necessarily. I don't think it's I don't think it's optimal, and I am not sure if it means a healthy thing if that's what's happening.
Okay.
But I do think that, let's say if you're asking me this question a year from now, I have a totally different answer. So like
Ooh.
right now,
Okay.
if you're telling me right now, like people bring 2 Augencore decks or 2 Markolian decks, like I would think that's a problem because there's only this many cards and they're basically playing all the same cards in 2 decks. So these
Right.
cards are so much better than all the rest of the cards.
Yeah.
But it turns out that I'm playing, and the thing is like, if you look at Effect Kathy versus Unit Kathy, like those decks have different cards, but a lot of the core is the same, right?
Yeah.
If they were entirely different because like a year from now there's just a bunch more cards, I would feel a lot better about that. I would say like if 2 years from now someone brought 3 different Cathari decks and none of them had any cards overlapping, I would say that's a victory. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But if they're all playing the same first 10 or 20 cards and then the last 10 are what's different, I don't know if that's necessarily healthy. That's probably a sign that something wrong is happening, right? Um, so do I care about individual Paragon win rates? A ton. Yes, I do. In fact, that is one of the most accurate stats I have to tell deck win rates. Um,
Okay.
so I look at individual Paragon win rates all the time. I actually look at Paragon versus Paragon, and I look at Paragon versus Parallel. So like, how does Shoshana do against Neve, but how does Shoshana do against Shroud?
Yeah.
And so like
Right.
trying to balance, like that's why I didn't want to hurt Rallying Cry, because I was looking at Catherine specifically against Naeus and Sippy, and I wanted that win rate to stay high, but I wanted the win rate against Cathari, which was still around 50%, to stay that. So like I saw that the win rate was high, but that she was having a problem.
Cool. Well, I think that, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for coming on and giving us all of this insight. I think we're about ready to wrap up the episode, but is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you just would really want to communicate to the player base that maybe they don't know, or just some, kind of message and insight from you specifically?
I would say the fact that the people on this call were surprised by Ashio in the league doing well
Mm.
indicates that we don't know everything about the game that we think we know.
True.
The game has a rapidly evolving metagame, a rabid player base, of fans that are super into it, and the game changes week to week, even without balance changes happening. And so I would say that if you have an issue with the meta, or if you have an issue that you think is balance related, try to tackle it in the game before you think that it's something that needs to change on the game balance level. And I think you'll be surprised as to what tools exist to solve your problems inside Parallel and inside the meta, as opposed to relying on me to fix it. I will try my best, but I am also merely one person. And I will try to keep your balance in mind, but I think that the strength of the Parallel community will solve more problems than I can solve.
Love it. Experiment before you at Veen on Twitter, basically, guys.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Mookah, do you have any thoughts before we send it off?
No, this was absolutely awesome. Happy to be a part of this episode, especially. Thank you, Veen, for the time you gave us, and I'm really excited for Aftermath and Deception. I just want to experiment with more cards, so the more we get, the better.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
I feel like my job is secure if everyone's excited about new sets.
Awesome. All right. Well, Veen, thank you so much for coming on. And next week, guys, Mookah's here. He's here to stay. Again, my new co-host, super excited about it. So you will catch the two of us next week for another episode. Thank you so much that listens to the episodes and supports them on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, whatever it may be. Again, thank you, Veen, and we'll catch you guys next
This was
week.
a blast. Thank you.
This was a 983 Media Productions podcast.